This time, I moved to another area in Arizona, a place where sparse forest blends with dry, barren ground, and wild boar tracks appear heavily concentrated around the few remaining water sources. Why are they gathering here in such large numbers? Was turning this place into a new hotspot? And are they beginning to adapt in ways that make ordinary traps less effective? Those warning signs were exactly what forced me to start trapping here immediately, before the situation became even harder to control. I decided to set a total of 5 traps, and the first one was placed in an open clearing deep in the woods, an area covered with fresh signs of wild boar activity. After finishing the setup and spreading bait, I left to continue placing the remaining traps in other locations. The work lasted for hours, but throughout the entire process, I couldn't stop thinking about that first trap, wondering whether it would actually work as planned. When I finally returned, I could already tell from quite a distance that something had happened. The silence that normally covered the area was now broken by loud, chaotic noises coming from the direction of the trap. And as I got closer, the sight in front of me genuinely caught me off guard. Inside the trap, an entire group of aggressive wild boars had been captured. They shoved against one another, moving wildly in panic. But no matter how violently they reacted, they still couldn't escape. The second trap had been placed right beside the forest edge. After checking the first trap, I could barely wait any longer and immediately headed toward the second location. The moment I got close, I realized something was wrong. The wire mesh surrounding the trap was shaking violently in the stillness of the forest. As I moved closer, the scene became clear. A pair of wild boars was trapped inside, thrashing around desperately while trying to escape. They slammed repeatedly into the fencing, spinning around inside the confined space and creating sharp, tense bursts of noise. But despite how aggressively they reacted, the trap continued to hold them firmly inside. That day had already been more than enough, so we decided to stop and leave the remaining traps unchecked until the following morning. As darkness fell, wild boars slowly began emerging from the woods, following the scent of bait into the traps through the silence of the night. When we returned the next morning, I almost froze at the sight in front of me. The number inside had increased dramatically. It was no longer just a handful of boars like before. Now there were dozens packed tightly together inside the confined space. They moved chaotically, creating relentless crashing sounds that made the atmosphere feel more intense than ever. Another trap showed clear signs that a large number of boars had entered during the night. The tracks and damage left inside proved that the original group had been much bigger. But when we checked the trap the next morning, the scene was completely different. Only 7 boars remained inside. It was obvious that most of them had escaped. The signs around the area showed that they had actually leaped over the fencing to break free, something I never expected them to do so easily. That alone proved these wild boars were not only numerous, but also incredibly strong and extremely reckless. The final trap turned out to be the biggest surprise of all. It had been placed in the middle of an exposed clearing, a location where I honestly didn't expect much because there was almost no natural cover around it. But when we checked it, The result was the complete opposite of what I anticipated. Inside was an entire herd of wild boars, both fully grown adults and smaller juveniles, crowded tightly together inside the trap. Clearly, they had let their guard down in a way I never expected, and that was exactly what turned this trap into one of the most successful locations of the entire operation. After finishing the inspection of every trap, I stood still for a moment and looked back across the vast area surrounding us. This time, the results went far beyond my expectations, not only because of the numbers, but because of how the wild boars were adapting and reacting. Some traps worked perfectly, but other situations revealed something far more concerning. The boars were becoming bolder, more unpredictable, and much harder to control. And that made me realize one thing clearly. Even though we achieved results today, this confrontation is far from over. More than 150 pounds of rippling muscle, razor-sharp tusks, and a breeding speed far beyond control. We are slowly losing ground to wild boars if we keep relying on traditional trapping methods. As wildlife control managers in Texas, we bring a new control tool here. Soft, but impossible to break. But to capture an entire group of intelligent wild boars, old steel cages are no longer enough. We need a smarter strategy, a soft net trapping system called pig brig. The whole team moved immediately. Everyone had their role, working in perfect coordination. The heavy hammer strikes drove 7-foot steel stakes deep into the hard ground. The pig brig net was carefully suspended. Fermented corn bait was spread evenly from the outside toward the center. Sweat soaked through our protective clothing, but a perfect trap was finally ready. At a trap site near the forest edge, a large herd of boars had appeared. They were eagerly feeding on the fermented corn bait inside the net, completely unaware that they were already trapped. Outside, a few scout boars still stood back in the darkness, alert, watching, testing. They absolutely refused to step inside. The next morning, we drove to the site to inspect the overnight catch. Everything inside the trap became tense immediately. Every boar panicked and ran wildly the moment they saw human figures approaching. A full herd of wild boars of every size. Big ones, small ones. They charged continuously at the net walls. But it was useless. The pig brig net absorbed every impact. With no hard surface to push against, they quickly exhausted themselves, and everything was brought under control. The net trap had done its job perfectly, but the wild boars were still out there, and we could not allow ourselves to become careless. Noticing that the herd had started changing its travel route, I decided to establish a new trap point in an open grassy area between the forest and the farmland. During the first few days, we rolled the lower edge of the net upward. Bait was spread from the outside inward. This was the familiarization stage, allowing them to move freely in and out. When the camera reported back, an 80-pound scout boar stepped forward first. It sniffed around the net, carefully feeding outside the trap. The others stood farther away, watching. But eventually, the temptation of food won. Later, they finally pushed their snouts forward and slipped completely inside the net. The trap quietly closed without a single sound. Their survival instinct had been deceived by a design that felt too natural. The next morning, bright sunlight filled the sky. We approached the open field. The harsh sunlight made me squint, my chest pounding at the scene in front of me. Once again, chaos. A large herd of boars was desperately trying to escape. One huge boar, weighing no less than 120 pounds, pushed its front legs upward, trying to climb over the 7-foot net wall. Dust flew everywhere. They slammed continuously into the net walls. The entire area looked like it had been torn apart by pure panic. The following night, the clock showed nearly 9 p.m. The herd arrived. They pushed their snouts onto the net close to the ground, fighting each other to get inside and reach the bait, only to become trapped almost immediately. The principle of the trap is one way: easy to enter, impossible to leave. But suddenly, my heartbeat sped up. I cursed quietly under my breath. One boar entering had accidentally exposed a small opening, and another immediately slipped backward and escaped. It happened in an instant. Nature always finds a way to punish the smallest mistakes, forcing us to be even more careful with every detail of the setup. The hardest mission waited at the final trap point. Last year, this entire area had been completely destroyed by wild boars. Not even a blade of grass remained. We patiently waited several more days for the boars to grow familiar with the presence of the net. When we finally saw signs that they had started entering the trap to feed, I lowered the net, but intentionally left a tiny part of the entrance slightly open. A psychological trap designed to lure the most stubborn ones deeper inside. The result finally came. After a long period of monitoring, we successfully captured a massive male boar weighing around 140 pounds. And when dawn arrived, my breathing grew heavier with every step forward. Inside the net, the giant male boar and its herd were crowded together in complete chaos, desperately trying to break free. They slammed into every corner, turned in circles, bit wildly at everything around them. The entire steel stake system shook violently under the force of their power. But every escape attempt became hopeless. The confinement had been established completely. Controlling wild boars is not about fighting muscle with muscle. It is a game of patience, reading tracks, and understanding animal behavior. When that knowledge is combined with smart tools, we do not just protect the farm's property. We complete the mission safely, professionally, and responsibly. After the last net trap setup, I realized something. This wild boar herd had changed. The net traps were no longer effective. They no longer moved in large groups like before, no longer rushed toward baited areas so easily. The tracks were still there, but more scattered, more sparse. And they always stopped just short of the places where I had previously set traps. And that made everything much harder. I needed a different approach. I needed a trap large enough to capture an entire herd quickly and efficiently. The first trap was set up during the day in a clearing deep inside the pine forest. Everything was carefully arranged, discreet enough not to raise suspicion among the boars. As night fell, they began to appear. One by one, they followed the scent of food into the enclosure. And once the entire herd had moved deep enough inside, the trap door suddenly slammed shut in the darkness. The next morning, when I returned to check it, the sounds and movement coming from inside told me the trap had worked exactly as planned. Two more traps were placed directly out in the open fields of the farm, a location that seemed far too obvious. I didn't expect much, since the area had almost no cover at all. But the result was the complete opposite. After just one night, the traps had captured far more wild boars than I anticipated. When I checked them, the scene inside genuinely shocked me. Clearly, the herd had let its guard down in a way I never expected. The fourth trap was placed right along the edge of the pine forest, an area the wild boars frequently pass through. When I came back to inspect it, several black-coated boars were already trapped inside. From a distance, they still moved cautiously, but the closer I got, the more panicked they became. The repeated crashes against the metal frame echoed non-stop, making the entire atmosphere feel more tense than ever. The final trap was placed deep within the dense pine forest, where sunlight barely reached the ground and where the wild boars often moved with little caution. We set the trap directly along an old trail. The signs were still clear. Every detail was adjusted carefully, from the position of the drop gate to the way the bait was scattered so it looked as natural as possible. Once everything was finished, we left, allowing the forest to fall silent again. As night came, the cameras began recording the first movements. Out of the darkness, the wild boars appeared. At first, only a few approached cautiously, moving slowly and constantly sniffing the air. Then gradually, the entire herd gathered inside the trap zone. And once all of them had moved deep enough inside, the gate suddenly slammed shut. The sound shattered the silence of the forest. Instantly, the herd erupted into panic. The boars in front turned around, only to find the exit blocked. The ones behind kept pushing forward, creating complete chaos inside the enclosure. Squeals, violent impacts, and the pounding of hooves crashing into one another echoed non-stop, shaking the entire trap violently. The next morning, when we returned, we could already hear the noise from a distance. And the closer we got, the more agitated the boars became, constantly moving, slamming into the frame, desperately searching for an escape that no longer existed. The tension filled the entire area. After finishing the inspection of all the traps, we began the harvest. Each trap was handled one by one, while the atmosphere remained tense as the wild boars continued reacting violently inside. Guiding them out and loading them onto the trucks was far from simple. It required tight coordination and careful calculation with every movement. From aggressive adults to tightly packed piglets, every animal had to be controlled and transported back to the collection point. And when the final truck finally drove away, I looked back across the trapping grounds and truly understood the scale of this operation. This wasn't just a hunt. It was an entire effort to control a wild boar population far larger than we had originally expected. When everything was finally over, the forest slowly returned to silence, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew this was only one part of a much longer battle. What we accomplished today was necessary to keep everything under control before things spiral beyond limits once again. What would you do when facing over 200 pounds of muscle charging wildly through the darkness? For us, that's just another day on the job in Mississippi. With the support of infrared cameras and specialized net traps, we move in to eliminate the threat before crops are destroyed. Hop in and follow us into the hotspot right now. We are specialists in a rapid response wild hog control team in the Mississippi Delta. In this region, wild hogs are an ecological disaster. They tear up levees, destroy crops, and carry disease. Every day, my job starts with reading the signs. Freshly churned mud, deep hoof prints in damp soil, or scattered corn trails. That's how we map their movement. Our goal isn't blind eradication. It's safe wild boar trapping, minimizing the risk of accidents for both people and livestock. Two 20-foot pig brig net trap systems are already in place. The moment the hogs sense human presence, panic erupts inside the trap. They slam violently into the net walls, trampling over each other in a desperate attempt to escape. Dust explodes into the air, mixing with sharp, piercing squeals. But the net flexes, absorbing every impact and keeping them contained. To achieve this, we had been calculating and preparing for days. This system demands absolute patience. On Thursday night, we set the trap in conditioning mode. The net was suspended high on 6-foot steel T-posts, with dozens of pounds of corn spread evenly below. The hogs fed freely without feeling threatened. A few days later, we switched to capture mode. The net was lowered. Everything was ready, but wild hogs are not easy to fool. Camera data came in just after 1 a.m. Tension built in my chest as I watched the herd circle the trap on my phone screen. They were smarter than expected. The entire group stayed outside, using their snouts to eat the bait around the edges. Not a single one stepped fully under the hanging net. That was the real test. If we lost patience and intervened, we'd lose everything. Nearly an hour later, the lead sow finally gave in to hunger. She lifted the edge of the net with her snout and slipped inside. The rest followed immediately. Success. The next morning, as we approached, the entire group was in chaos. Mud splattered across the net, hooves sliding violently across the soaked ground until we began restraining them one by one. Around 11 p.m., the camera showed a large boar slowly approaching a circular cage trap with a netted entrance. It was extremely cautious, feeding only at the edge, its body not fully inside. Finally, it stepped fully inside. The 200-pound mass stood still for a moment, confused, chewing corn as if it hadn't yet realized it was trapped. That night, we headed out again to another trap site near a livestock farm. We arrived on site. A teammate pointed quietly to a torn section of net. Earlier, a hog had escaped through that exact spot. We had patched it, but the backup clips weren't strong enough. Wild hogs have excellent memory. If this one found that weak point again, it could escape. We weren't taking that risk. A single, decisive shot rang out. The threat was neutralized instantly. The next morning, we returned to clear the site. The hogs inside were still aggressive. Our muscles tensed as we tightened our grip on specialized catch poles. The loop snare tightened just enough to control each animal's resistance. Working in sync, we secured them one by one and loaded them efficiently onto the pickup truck. By early afternoon, the pickup stopped at the final trap site. The most destructive individuals in the area were here. Inside, they charged and slammed into the net in desperation. We continued processing them one by one. The job ended as the sun began to dip. Exhaustion set in, but the control operation was complete.
Go! Go, yeah! Turn. Hip! Hip! Get turned. Hip! Hip! Hip!
I once thought everything was over, after the previous time setting traps. But I couldn't have imagined that very night, the wild boars would return in even greater numbers. A frightening thought crossed my mind. They had come back to take revenge for their own kind. But no matter what, if I didn't act immediately with this level of destruction, the entire farm would be wiped out in just a few nights. I would set traps and take them all down. I didn't have much time. If this herd had returned for revenge, they would come back again. And next time, it could be even worse. I began scanning the entire area around the farm, trails, fresh footprints, patches of ground that had just been torn up. Just by looking, I could already determine their paths and habits. And if I wanted to stop them, I had to stay one step ahead. I carried all my equipment and moved to each position I had identified beforehand. At the western forest edge, I set up the first trap right along the trail. Fresh footprints were still clearly visible in the soil. I didn't waste time, secured the trap frame, checked the trigger mechanism, then began spreading bait. The scent of food spread quickly through the damp night air. That night, we continued installing more traps scattered around the area. Once everything was done, we left, returning the silence for the boars to come. The next morning, we came back. As I approached the first trap, I froze. Inside the cage was a group of wild boars crammed together, panicking, constantly slamming into the metal bars. And that was only the first one. But the second trap, everything went far beyond what I had imagined. The moment we got closer, the crashing sounds came in rapid bursts. The boars inside reacted far more violently. They weren't just panicking, they were almost going mad. Each powerful impact slammed against the iron frame, making the entire cage shake violently. At times, it felt like it could burst open at any moment. The larger one stood in front, repeatedly charging at the trapdoor as if trying to break it. Behind them, others pushed and trampled over each other, forming a chaotic, uncontrollable mass. The tension in the air rose instantly. We had to keep our distance. The third trap was what truly made me stop in my tracks. From quite a distance, I could already hear the noise. No longer just scattered impacts, but a continuous, heavy, chaotic sound, as if something was trying to break free at all costs. As I got closer, I could hardly believe my eyes. Inside the cage was a number of wild boars so large that it was completely packed. They were pressed tightly against one another, filling every corner, leaving no space at all. The ones near the front kept slamming into the metal frame, while those behind were forced upward, creating immense pressure on the entire trap. At the fourth trap, everything suddenly became quieter. There were no violent impacts, no chaotic noise like the previous traps. Inside the cage were adult boars, not overly large, but still strong enough to be dangerous if handled carelessly. The final trap surprised me in a different way. As I approached, I realized there were almost no adults inside. All of them were young wild boars, smaller in size, faster in movement, constantly squeezing against one another in the confined space. They weren't big enough to deliver the powerful blows of adults, but they were far from harmless. On the contrary, they were the biggest problem because all of them were future threats to my farm. After checking all the traps, I stood still and looked over the entire area. The number of wild boars caught was greater than ever before, from aggressive adults to young ones that hadn't even grown yet. Each trap revealed a different problem, and after everything I'd seen, I knew this would not be the last time. 2 days ago, the wild boar sweep was more successful than expected. The number of boars captured reached into the hundreds. But it didn't end there. The lead boars, cunning, alert, and incredibly sly, were still able to evade capture in almost unbelievable ways. I knew I had to use a different approach to catch them. A series of traps had to be set. The first trap was placed right at the edge of the forest where I knew it would pass. As night fell, the lead boar appeared alone, moving very slowly, constantly stopping to sniff and observe with extreme caution. It stepped forward, then backed away several times, making me think it would leave. But in a single moment of lowered guard, it moved deep inside. The trapdoor slammed shut decisively. Instantly, it reacted violently, repeatedly ramming into the metal bars, making the cage shake intensely. The next trap worked exactly as expected. 2 wild boars appeared, moving slowly and cautiously. They kept stopping to sniff, but in the end, the bait still drew them inside. The moment both stepped deep enough, the trapdoor snapped shut. Immediately, they reacted violently, moving constantly inside the cage, ramming in multiple directions to find a way out. But this time, the trap held firm. Both were captured. The next morning, I returned to check each trap. From a distance, I could already hear constant noise coming from them. As I got closer, the boars inside immediately reacted, moving and slamming into the metal bars. I kept my distance, quickly observing the situation before handling each trap one by one. The next trap surprised me. When I checked, it was completely packed with wild boars. Not just 1 or 2, but an entire group caught at once. They were crammed together, moving chaotically and constantly hitting the metal frame, creating a scene completely different from the previous traps. Another trap on the western edge of the forest had also been triggered, but this time only 1 boar was caught. As we approached, it immediately reacted strongly, constantly moving inside the cage and ramming into the metal bars. The confined space made it even more aggressive, trying every possible way to escape, but the trap held firm. The final trap was deep inside a barren part of the forest, where I didn't expect so much activity. But as I got closer, I was truly surprised. Inside were massive wild boars packed tightly together, making the trap so crowded that there was almost no space left. They moved heavily, constantly striking the metal frame, creating the feeling that the cage could be under extreme pressure at any moment.
take a look.
After checking all the traps, I finally let out a sigh of relief. At least the most dangerous wild boars have been brought under control. The surrounding area gradually returned to quiet, and for the first time in many days, I felt that things were temporarily under control. After the major success of last week's wild boar roundup, the feral pigs around my farm were finally under control. It felt like I could finally take a break until I got a phone call. At my uncle's farm, hundreds of kilometers away, they were facing the exact same problem, maybe even worse. Large groups of wild boars have been showing up, destroying crops, tearing up the land, and losing almost all fear of humans. The first trap was set along the edge of pine forest. This time, I used a net trap instead of steel cage. With such a wide area and boars moving in large groups, this type of trap could capture several at once without making them as suspicious as enclosed cages would. After spreading bait around the area, we quickly backed away and watched from a distance. We didn't have to wait long. By late afternoon, the wild boars began to appear. One by one, they moved toward the bait site. One by one, they stepped inside without the slightest suspicion. And by the time they realized something was wrong, the entire group was already trapped inside the net enclosure. The moment I moved closer, they went into a frenzy, desperately searching for a way out, but there was none. At the next location, we placed another trap out in an open field. This area was exposed with very little cover, so the boars were much more cautious and didn't appear as quickly as they had near the forest edge. We had no choice but to leave the trap overnight. The next morning, we came back to check it, and by then, several wild boars were already caught inside. As we approached the trap, the boars became frantic once again. had desperately tried to escape, but it was impossible. The net was strong, yet flexible, absorbing every impact and completely neutralizing their attacks against it. The next location was an open clearing in the western forest near the farm. This time, we used a steel cage trap, but the most interesting part was the mesh door at the front. At first glance, it looked simple, almost unremarkable. And that was exactly what made the wild boars lower their guard. Drawn in by the scent of food, they walked inside step by step without realizing anything was wrong. Only when they turned around did they discover that the entrance they had just walked through was no longer an exit. By midday, I returned to check the final net trap near the southern edge of the forest. I stopped for a few seconds, and then I realized something unexpected. Inside were not fully grown wild boars. Almost all of them were piglets. They crowded together, constantly moving, creating a chaotic scene, but somehow it felt completely different from the previous traps. Once the situation was under control, we began the hardest part, moving each wild boar from the trap into the truck bed. The tight space made them even more aggressive, constantly resisting as we pushed them in one direction. Every step had to be carefully calculated, keeping enough distance to stay safe while still applying enough pressure to force them forward. The crashing sounds, the pounding hooves, the chaos of them stumbling over one another, it made the entire situation more tense than ever. It took quite a while before we finally managed to load them all up and secure everything before leaving the area. After checking the final trap, I stood there for a while, looking across the surrounding area. Everything had slowly gone quiet again. The chaos from earlier was gone, but this time, the feeling was different. Not complete relief, because what I was looking at wasn't just captured wild boars. It was an entire cycle beginning again. The adults could be controlled, but the young ones were only the beginning. That sound always begins in the middle of the night. The crack of dry branches snapping apart. The sound of roots being violently torn from the ground again and again. And the sharp snap of barbed wire fences breaking under the force of wild boars. The farmer can only listen helplessly as thousands of dollars vanish into the darkness. The moment we received the report, we, The rapid response specialist from the Texas Wildlife Management Agency set out immediately. In the back of the truck was the game-changer trapping system. Without wasting any time, the whole team immediately began checking every footprint and every patch of torn-up soil to trace the movement of the herd. The first trap location was a narrow, dry creek bed where the tight terrain made a small modular trap the only possible option. The signal flashed. Through the infrared camera, the entire herd had entered the trap, completely absorbed in eating the bait. After one deep, controlled breath, my finger pressed the trigger without hesitation, and the heavy steel gate slammed shut, tearing through the silence of the night. Not stopping at the first result, we continued checking the system and quickly shifted to the next target. The herd had already entered, but a few large males still hesitated outside, snorting and sensing something unusual in the wind. Waiting meant the boars inside would finish eating and leave, but acting immediately would allow the ones outside to escape. There was no perfect choice. I tightened my hand and decisively pressed the drop trap command. The gate slammed shut instantly. The boars outside vanished into the darkness in panic within seconds, while inside the cage, chaos erupted violently. Heavy bodies crashed wildly in every direction, slamming into the steel frame like waves hitting rock. The third trap point, deep inside the forest, had movement. The exhaustion disappeared instantly. This area was completely different because the wild boars here reacted with extreme aggression when cornered, forcing us to deploy a large circular trap. No sharp corners, no pressure points. The camera screen lit up, clearly showing a large herd gathering beneath the feeder, each one stepping inside without the slightest suspicion. The decisive moment had arrived. Both drop gates were triggered at the same time. The boars froze for a split second before their wild instincts took over. They ran in circles, colliding and crushing against each other, creating a sound of hooves mixed with violently shaking metal. Near the orchard, the boars here were extremely intelligent. They feared narrow entrances. Traditional drop gates became useless. The best solution this time was 2 fully suspended cage traps. No doors, no walls, no visible danger. The herd slowly moved in, cautious and suspicious, finding nothing unusual. The moment the last sow crossed the line, the drop command was confirmed. The entire heavy steel frame dropped freely to the ground. The boars jumped in terror, crashing wildly into everything in complete panic. But the solid steel structure held them in place. The gamble was over, and this time, we won completely. But did you know, behind every successful trap closure is an entire system calculated down to the smallest detail. We use flexible steel modules. Steel mesh is locked together with quick pins, and anchor stakes are driven several feet deep to withstand the force of hundreds of pounds of impact. During the first days, bait is scattered everywhere, so the herd loses suspicion. On the decisive night, the bait is placed only in the farthest corner inside the trap, forcing them to push their entire bodies into the fully secured zone. Only when technology and psychology work together perfectly can we reclaim peace for the fields. The moment we arrived at the site and stood beside the steel mesh, we could truly see how terrifying they were. Massive blocks of muscle, skin thick like armor. They carried diseases that threatened both livestock and native wildlife. Without allowing the herd's panic to continue any longer, we immediately carried out the final step of the process. Every handling procedure was done right there, from outside the trap. No unnecessary, prolonged panic.
Yep, it's probably slick. Yep. You hear him in there?
Every wild boar captured is not simply another number on a report. It means fields saved, irrigation systems no longer destroyed, and an entire ecosystem protected from silent devastation. If you want to witness more fast-paced and intense control operations like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next video. By daylight, this field may still look normal, but after just one night, by the next morning, the soil has been torn apart in patches, roots ripped upward, empty spaces left behind as if something passed through and swept away every ounce of hard work. What worries them is not only the scale of destruction, but the fact that it returns almost every night, consistent, relentless, and unpredictable. And that is the sign that if no action is taken in time, an entire harvest could disappear. That is exactly why our team is here again, to install traps strong enough and solid enough to hold the line. Without wasting time, we completed the first net trap that same day on the southern edge of the forest. Before long, it gave its first signal. One boar had been caught inside, but instead of staying contained, it reacted violently, charging straight into the netted gate again and again. The mesh stretched tight, shaking wildly with every impact. The decision was made immediately after that. We would not dismantle the old trap, but we would no longer rely on this type of system. At once, on the northern side of the forest, where the terrain was tighter and more enclosed, a different setup was built, a steel door trap. Heavier frame, stronger locks, a gravity drop gate that did not depend on tension like netting. It only needed to be strong enough to withstand a direct hit from a herd of wild boars. When everything was ready, we waited in silence for nightfall. The tension in the air was so thick that no one said a word. Then the first movement appeared. The smell of bait quickly drew in the herd. And when the moment came, when every last one had stepped inside, click, the trigger was activated. The gate dropped shut. Inside, several boars reacted instantly. They burst into frantic motion, searching for an escape. But every direction was sealed. Metal rang out in sharp beats. Short, clean, final. We looked at one another. For the first time, the trap had worked exactly as intended. At another point near the forest edge, the reinforced trap set by Tom did not take long to activate either. Though it caught only a few, it would still reduce the damage to this season's crops to the local farmers. Once the trap was sprung, the boars tried to escape by instinct. But that was impossible. They had been fully contained inside the solid structure we had spent so much effort preparing. And did not stop there. Texas is home to more than 3 million feral hogs. So together with landowners, we often place traps like these out in the fields. The trap in this area became another hotspot, stirring up noise at the edge of the woods. When large, powerful boars were found contained inside, it proved one thing clearly. The system was working exactly as we had planned. Every time a trap was triggered, we did not rush to celebrate, but at the very least, everyone felt a little more at ease. The traps continued to be reinforced. We continued the control operation. This time, we were determined to catch every last one, to leave them no chance to damage this area again. Every year, our state of Texas alone suffers around $400, $500 million in economic losses caused by wild hogs. This final night was considered the decisive one. Once again, we took our positions, held our breath, and waited. At the first trap, the herd had grown larger. Not only adults, but smaller ones as well entered the enclosure. The space inside began to tighten. Then, at the perfect moment, the trap let out a chilling clack. Instantly, movement inside became faster, more violent, more desperate. Heavy blows slammed into the steel frame. Metal rang out sharply. Others circled and shoved. The entire trap shook in waves. But this time, just like the night before, not a single one escaped. We kept watching, kept waiting, and then everything reached its peak. A massive herd appeared, not scattered individuals anymore, but a dense, moving flood. They fed greedily on the bait scattered across the ground until BM, the gate crashed down. At once, the trap exploded with noise inside. Feet pounding the dirt, steel bars rattling without pause. And in that moment, we understood more clearly than ever. If the trap system had not been strong enough, everything would have burst apart. The next morning, we did not dismantle the trap right away, because we knew there was still more out there. And we were right. Another large herd had been caught just before dawn. When we walked past, they became even more agitated. Several slammed into the steel frame so hard the entire trap shook repeatedly. And do you know what was inside that cage? The very reason those fields have been destroyed for weeks. As everything gradually came under control, the farm grew quiet again. No more fresh tracks each morning. No more furrows torn open after every night. This was not a hunt. This was the only way to save the harvest. Because once wild boars discover a stable food source, they do not stop on their own. In situations like this, what do you think matters more? A trap strong enough, or the patience to wait for the perfect moment? Leave your thoughts below.